Hello, everybody. I'm Rhys Dekle. So let's just get started. So just so you have a little bit of a preview in terms of what I'm going to talk about in this 25-minute period, these are some common questions that I get all the time that I'm going to address during this talk. If I don't address them, point them out at the end and I will address them. I'm not going to run through them. You can read them. Not going to talk too much to this, but, you should probably know a little bit about me because why should you listen to what I have to say anyway? A few things. I was at Microsoft for a decade running biz dev for game studios. Did franchises like Gears of War. I bought the Gears of War IP away from Epic, actually. Worked on the launch of the Kinect and the Xbox One. I'm the principal architect of the ID at Xbox program for self-publishing. Which a lot of people actually don't know. Before that, I ran a retail P&L in games for a Fortune 500 company. I was one of the top 10 buyers of console video games once upon a time. And prior to that, I was a McKinsey & Company, Goldman Sachs. I also was an entrepreneur in Tokyo for a number of years before my B school degree. So, this is going to be a talk about how to get acquired at a premium price. And first, just going on to motivations. Why do people sell their game companies, right? They sell for some good reasons, and they sell for some unfortunate reasons. The good reasons, right, because their lives and their priorities have changed, because they realize their earlier goals, because the opportunity that's presented by the marketplace is greater than operating the company independently. Some of the poor reasons, because they're tired or disillusioned, but sometimes we all get there. Sometimes there's a bigger problem with the business, fundamentally underlying the business, and you see it, and you want to sell before others do. And those motivations feed into whether you can command a commodity price or a premium price. So when I say commodity price, I mean, essentially what Chris Petrovic just referred to as an acqui-hire. Right? They're buying your people, and they're resuming the employment contracts that you currently have, and they're paying a certain bounty for the people that you have. Usually, in the United States, you're going to pay somewhere between $250,000 to $500,000 per engineer. That's it. Chump change. In the heyday of Zynga, when they were buying a lot of talent because they were scaling up, they would pay up to $1.5 million per engineer, and that was still a commodity price back then. But a premium exit, by definition, is driven by the earnings of the company and driven by the assets of the company. And it serves a strategic purpose to the buyers, right? It's not just capacity. It's about a strategic purpose that the buyer has. And because of that, there's room and tolerance for negotiation that you don't have in an acqui-hire situation. Right? So there's an expectation that you negotiate, and there's an appreciation that you negotiate, not just the price, but all of the terms. And because the price and the value of the company is so large in this deal transaction, the deals get quite complex very fast. And so they, before you know it, there are a lot of little different levers that you have to be careful about, and you have to get just right, otherwise you could end up screwing yourself. So, should you sell when you have to sell or when you feel like it, those bad reasons that we talked about, that's a commodity pricing strategy. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I think it's generally obvious, but when you put in place a process, you go to investment bankers and they shop you around with a book and you meet all the potential buyers, the first question that they ask is, what's wrong with these guys? It's not, oh my God, these guys must be great because they're on sale, right? It's like, what's wrong with these guys? So they try to sniff it out. You have to overcome this barrier that there's something wrong with you. That's not any kind of formula for getting a good price. You're going to get a low price. And when you go out selling yourself, you have to announce what your price is. And I can guarantee you, no one's ever going to offer you more than the price that you dictate, right? So you set the limit yourself. However, when you're approaching a premium pricing strategy, that's more of a waiting game, right? That's more about doing the right things, polishing up the little diamond that you have in your company, right? Making yourself attractive, and then waiting for potential buyers to say, you know what, these guys are doing a really killer job. It's completely in line with our strategy. We need what they've got. Right? So that means that you have to take up a unique position in the marketplace, doing something that is differentiated. You know, whether you are the casual mobile games kings or whether you are, you know, a console game multiplayer shooter specialist, like you have to have a unique positioning in the marketplace, identify it, go after it, right? Fundamental to getting a good valuation today is owning a valuable IP. And by valuable, I mean it monetizes. It's a running service. It brings in money. The money that it brings in exceeds the amount that it costs to service the game, and you actually have a profit in the form of EBITDA, right? Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. And it's that EBITDA that later determines the valuation of the company in large part. We'll talk about that. But more than that, you want to develop a reputation, right? Reputations are so important for quality, consistency, maturity, and sanity. I mean, it's a creative industry, and so as a result, we have a lot of crazy people, and they act with volatility. Not everybody's easy to work with. If you develop a reputation that you're not only consistent and smart, but easy to work with, you are also more valuable. And then last, I would say, something that people don't appreciate is that you're far more likely to be bought by someone you've already worked with. So, in every deal, distribution, publishing, whatever deal that you do, you should also additionally ask yourself the question, are these people capable of buying me down the line? Do they have deep pockets? Are they acquisitive, right? Are they potentially good owners of the other companies that they've bought? Are these the kind of people that I want to be bought by, right? Because you're only going to do a few deals in your company's lifetime. And so you have to choose those partnerships selectively with the end game in mind that someday you may be ready to sell yourself. So frequently, these days, people talk about investment. So, you know, should I take investment in my company? A Chinese or a Korean buyer comes to me and they want to buy 10% of my company, 20% of my company, and put in a couple $1 million. And I think it'd be nice to have some money in my bank account for a rainy day. So is that a good idea? And I would say my bias is that unless you know exactly what you're going to do with that money and how you need that money to get you to that next strategic level, it's a bad idea. Just to have money in the bank account, stupid idea to give away 10 or 20% of your company. You lose a lot of options. If you get into bed with someone who is a large player, right, well-known publisher in the industry, whether they're from Asia or the Western markets, all the other publishers will shy away from you. They would prefer to work with people that are not encumbered with one of their partners, right? They don't want you to make a lot of money with them and 10% of that to go to their competitor. Plus, they don't want their competitors seeing their contracts. And you may have a Chinese wall, and that may be implicit, but at the same time, as a former publisher, I'll tell you, we don't believe that. The other thing is, you often, not always, but you often, depending on who the investor is, you prevent yourself from a future exit, but with other offers from other buyers, right? Other than the guy that invested in you. So if buyer A has put in, $1 million and bought 10% of your company today, and then 3 or 4 years from now, buyer B comes and looks at you and says, you know what, I want to pay you $100 million for your company. Buyer A is going to say, I'll pay you $110 million for your company, because they get 10 million of that 110 million, so they're paying the exact same price, and they've outbid the first buyer. Now, the first buyer is not stupid. He knows that's what's going to happen, so he'll never approach you, never will make an offer. And so there will be no trigger for the original investor to actually buy you, right? Not to say that this is what always happens, but probabilistically, this is what happens. So, sources of enterprise value. It's not rocket science. And it's easy to say, but it's hard to do. The first source of enterprise value is building a business that generates EBITDA. It generates earnings, profits, right? And when I say EBITDA, different companies will use different measurements. They'll use past EBITDA, your current EBITDA, next year's forecast for an EBITDA to base your valuation on. Depends on the type of buyer, and we can talk about that. Obviously, underneath that is intellectual property. There's a good chance if you're making a lot of money today on a game, you probably own the IP to that game, and it's not owned by a publisher. Well, for that means that it's important for you to always fight for that intellectual property, to own it in any publishing or distribution deal that you do. Sometimes technology in itself, not just games, but technology has a value as IP, but that's a little less common in this industry. And then, more and more, because of self-publishing and mobile, etc., the amount of users that you have a direct communication with, that you actually control communication with, and can cross-promote with, that itself is an asset that has tremendous value. I would say 10 years ago, that concept didn't really exist except for a few MMOs. But today, it's widespread. Because acquiring users, as we know, is critical to success, and it's expensive. And then I would say the proven ability to consistently produce great work in a very specific area, right? Because again, the buyers are looking to fulfill whatever their strategic needs are, and it just happens that their strategic needs line up with your abilities in such a way that they feel compelled to buy you. They're not looking at 10 other companies, they're looking at you, right? And this I cannot say strongly enough. There's such a dearth of it in the industry, but as you scale up your businesses, as you scale up your studios, founders have to remember to put in place really strong middle management, right, underneath them. Why? Because if I'm going to pay you $60 million for your company, and I don't have you in chains because slavery is outlawed, I know that in 2 or 3 years, you're going to walk away. Why would I give you $60 million if you're going to walk away from me in 3 years? I'm going to pay you that because you built a company with strong middle management that will stay, right? And underneath them are people of the highest caliber, and these guys can keep the IP running and the game running and create new IP, and they're entirely capable of doing it without your particular genius, right? But so often, the failing point is, I understand, when you're a founder and you've built a small team and you've built a product together, you get addicted to that sense of control. And so putting in place middle managers who are competent and empowering them to do their jobs feels like you're losing control. But I would say, take a deep breath, enjoy the process, give it a chance, because in fact, you're gaining control. And then the last thing is, not as common in our business, but occasionally you will find a reason to file a patent, and patents themselves also have value in a company. So, rules to building enterprise value. These are kind of like fundamental rules that I tell all my clients. And they're easy to say. I always feel kind of cheap saying it, because these are easy to say, and they're super hard to do. And the reason why, guys like, our organization exist is because it's really hard, and it helps to have someone help you do it. The first is, you're a game developer, for Christ's sake. So, your first task is to make great games. Always make great games, whether it's a work-for-hire game for someone else, whether it's your own original IP, whether you're helping build some modular part of a larger game. Always, always build great games. And I have a little note to myself, because I don't actually put it on the slides, to talk a little bit about agents. I have many friends who are agents. And I have clients who do use agents, and I do think that agents have a place. I think they're very good for finding exotic opportunities. I think they're very good at finding things when you suddenly need them. So for very strategic, surgical purposes, I like agents. I don't like agents in front of your whole business, representing you. And the reason is, for me, pretty simple. Because your business is making great games, and the key to making great games is that last 1 or 2 months of polish. And that last 1 or 2 months of polish is funded by the last 10% of your budget. And you have an agent who takes 6 to 10% of your budget, guess what happens? You don't have time or money or resources for polish, so you just put out okay games. You don't put out great games. And so in my mind, having an agent in front of you all the time guarantees that you never really make it to the next round of developers, right? Those guys that are AAA. So the other is always fight to retain IP. And that's really important. Even if you know you're going to lose, always fight to retain IP with whoever it is you're making a deal with. Because the key to your value down the line is about whether you control that IP. And remember that there are many ways to slice IP ownership, right? Maybe you own the IP, but you lose control of it in Western markets, but you still retain all control in Asian markets, and you can actually do something with that. Like, there are ways to parse the IP apple. The other is always have a strategy. So always have a vision for where you want to take your company, what kind of game you want to make. Don't let your strategy be, I want to make a good game that people like and will pay for. That's just kind of wish fulfillment. That's not a strategy. And then this one is ridiculously simple. Avoid any gaps between, paying publishers, right? So if you're getting paid to make a game and the publisher suddenly bails on you, and then you have a 2-month gap while you're looking for another development deal, there's a good chance you'll go underneath. Like, you'll go bankrupt. 75% of the bankruptcies that happen in this space happen because there's a gap that's unplanned, right? And it is avoidable in many cases, but this is the thing that kills most companies. Then there's something called the 6-month rule. The 6-month rule, I always tell all my clients when I start working with them, the first thing we have to work on is getting 6 months of full payroll in the bank. Why? Because the most beautiful word in the English language when you're in the game industry is no. No. So if your publisher says, hey, you know what, I don't really like what you submitted, so I'm not going to pay your milestone until you fix it, and you're like, no, I'm just going to cancel the contract, screw you. Because I got 6 months in the bank. I can find a solution, so I don't need you. Then they're like, oh, you're right, I was a little unreasonable, we can work it out. Right? No gives you leverage and power. Right? And that's super important in just being able to dictate your course. No means that you can actually choose. You have choices. You have options that you can flesh out. Because you don't have to take the first thing that comes along. Right? So I know it's hard, but always work on trying to have 6 months worth of payroll in the bank at all times. Then the next is take as many shots on goal as you can. Because you're always making great games, right? Like we said. Even if you make a great game and it's there at the right time, if lightning doesn't quite hit it, then maybe you don't generate that hit. You probably won't generate that hit. But if you give yourself enough tries, then you're just doubling down on the chance that lightning will hit, and then suddenly you're holding on to a rocket ship, and you have a different set of problems, and they're good problems. And then the last, I talked about middle management, ABU, always be upgrading your team. Relentlessly cut people that don't work. Relentlessly cut people that are not up to par in the industry. Don't keep them around. It's poisonous for your team morale. They belong somewhere else. Push them out. Get better people in. Evaluation. So a meditation on valuation. So the principle of finance is that the value of an entity is the value to the buyer. So between buyer A and buyer B, when they're looking at you, they have two different valuations, and both are correct. Right? And that means that you have no business telling them what you're worth. They should be telling you what you are worth. So when they come to you and they say, hey, I'm kind of interested in buying you. How much, what's your number? Like 2 million, 3 million, what do you want? You have to respond in a way without any kind of answer. You have to respond with no number because it's their job to tell you what they think you are worth. Right? They're just trying to shake a number loose from you, hoping that you'll lowball yourself. So don't fall for that trap. Corporate buyers, and I've been on that side, right, a corporate buyer, they do a ton of valuation exercise on you. They look at your EBITDA and they multiply it, usually 7 to 10 times EBITDA in the West. In China, it's more on earnings, right, after taxes and depreciation. And it's like anywhere from 12 to 14.9 times your earnings, right? Ridiculously high right now. That window's probably closing, but it's still quite high. They'll do a discounted cash flow analysis to figure out your value. They'll look at comps, so recent deals of entities your similar size and scope, and figure out, well, is it reasonable, right? Is 50 million reasonable? This deal closed for 40, this deal closed for 90. Yeah, 50 seems reasonable. And then they'll do a build versus buy analysis. Oh, we want to build a digital publishing capability, so we could do it ourselves for $50 million over 3 years with some uncertainty, or we could buy these guys today for $60 million. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then, most importantly, they want to know what your number is. So they will come at you, and they're not evil. I was a buyer, and I'll tell you, we're not evil. We're just people doing our jobs, and we'll come at you trying to figure out how much is enough for you, right? You know, is he driving a Porsche because he already made a lot of money in a previous deal, or is he driving like a 75 Chevette, right? Is his wife like really eager for a transaction? Like, we'll take you out to dinner and we'll figure that stuff out. The LBO, the lowball offer. So you are guaranteed to have a lowball offer at some point in your existence. So someone will come to you and say, hey, you know, you guys look great. Like, maybe I could buy you for like $2 million. How's that sound? And they don't mean to, well, they actually kind of mean to be insulting, but they want to see if you jump at it. They want to see if you counter, right? But the proper response to the lowball offer is to be polite for their interest, thanks, and to say, you know what, we're so busy executing, we never really thought about our value. But I assure you, if we ever sell, we're going to sell for a proper valuation. The number that you just quoted, it's so far off that I don't think it's worth your time or mine to talk about it, but let's stay friends. Let's keep talking, but I'm going to get back to work, right? And then they'll go away, and then maybe 6 months later they might come back, because if they came back in 2 months, it'd be like too obvious that they were trying to screw you, right? But in 6 months, it's like, hey, the market's changed, or hey, you guys look better, or hey, our strategy has changed. There are a lot of excuses they can come back and offer you more money that's more appropriate to what they need. There's a good chance they'll never come back because they were just shaking the tree. But if they do come back, this time, they're actually more serious, and that means something. Okay? So does everybody get it? Like, what's the answer when I give you a lowball offer? Sir, if I give you a lowball offer, what's the answer? Great. I never thought about it as a good one, too. All right. So my rules of thumb for negotiating an acquisition. And then there's a bunch of slides that I'll probably never get to, but they'll be available. And yeah, they're giving me the 1-minute warning. But my rules of thumb for negotiating acquisition. So never negotiate it by yourself. Why? Because you may do 50 development distribution deals in your lifetime, and you can get pretty good at it. But you'll probably do 1 or 2 acquisition deals in your lifetime, and you're up against guys that do 10 or 20 full acquisition deals in their year. So they'll always know what they're doing relative to you. I don't care how smart you are. There are many, many guys like you who are super smart, but if you don't know the terrain, you always need a guide. You can climb your local mountain because it's safe. Everybody climbs it. The guy that just climbed it is in worse shape than you, and that's cool. You don't need a guide. But if you're going to climb Everest with all the, resulting rewards, you want a Sherpa, you want a guide. The next thing is, there's more than money to the deal. Actually, structure is more important than money to the deal, right? And we can talk about that. But what happens to your team, right? What happens to your company and its culture? When do you get your money? How do you get your money? These are the things that matter. So deal structure, just so you know the basics of it, every deal as you read about in the paper, don't be too impressed. Oh, this company, 200 million, 300 million. You don't know what portion of that is guaranteed and what is an earnout, okay? So let's say that 50% of that, 200 million, is guaranteed. It's the assured component. And the assured component is usually paid out between 1 and 3 years, right? So they'll parse it up, and maybe 50% of the 100 million is paid up front. and it's half cash, half stock in a company, and then the other two doled out over years, provided that you stay. And then there's what they call the earnout. That's the contingent component. So they may agree with you that you're worth 50 million, but you want to sell for 100 million, and you believe your plan will yield 100 million. They'll say, fine, we agree that you're worth 50, we will assure 50, and then you have a chance to earn another 50 based on your results. But there are things to consider in that, right? Like, do you actually have all the control that you need to execute against your plan when you're acquired by someone else, right? So are all the measures of that earnout in your control, right? So those are the two portions of the deal you got to think about. Then, this is a really important one. I think I'll close with that and just take a couple questions if I might. Providing information to buyers. So buyers are going to come at you and they're going to ask for a lot of information, right? Like, show me your financials. Show me your product roadmap. All of these things that are super confidential, you wouldn't show people, right? So I want to give you the proper short answer to all of these things. What are you worth? We haven't really thought about it. Show us your financials. Sure, as soon as I get a written offer from you, I'd be happy to engage in a due diligence process where I show my confidential numbers. Show us your contracts and your documentation. Sure, as soon as I get a written offer from you, I will show you my contracts and documentation. Trust me, even the guys you are working with in a distribution deal or a publishing deal, when they ask for your contracts and stuff with the idea that they might buy you, will turn around and use it to screw you and force you to sell. I've seen it happen several times. And there are I'm not saying publishers are predators because I used to be a publisher, but there are a few that have predatory tendencies. Show us your product roadmap. Same answer. Show me a written offer. What's your EBITDA? Is it growing, stable, or shrinking? If you have EBITDA and it's good, then you can say that I can't give you the finances on paper, but I can assure you the trajectory is good and you'll be happy when you see it. If you don't have EBITDA, you say that you're still investing in your future success. Right? All right, so I have some other slides here. You can see them later, but there's some deal timelines and processes. I think I've responded to most of these. Is there anything that anyone wants to know that I didn't talk to here? Okay, good. And that's my partner, Bob Wallace, and myself. My contact information. Happy to answer any questions. If I can just have 1 minute for a question. Anyone?
Hi, I'm Steven from Korea. I'm also just CEO of the company, just developing some mobile contents and maybe some poker game or something like that, and doing some global business just nowadays.
Great.
But I had the same the problem before. Maybe as you said, some maybe a Japanese company or a Chinese company just ask me some market research report, something like that, before they just invest on our company.
Mm-hmm.
But the same, don't worry, we don't just steal your information or just I just give you back all the information or something like that. But once I just gave them, they just disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
And then they used my just a research report, and what they made by themselves, something like that.
Right.
So they just invest, just by themselves, just build up the new business, maybe just by themselves. So in case of that, something happened. I'm not gonna just any investment from the company or something like that, or maybe losing my just a passion or maybe confidence, working with maybe investors or something like that, or maybe potential investors, something like that. So what can I do? Maybe I have to lawsuit against maybe someone just asked me some information or.
Well, I will say that depends on what you've signed. I mean, if you have an NDA that's mutual between the two of you, then I would talk to your lawyer about what's inside the NDA and what you gave them and how clear you are that they use the information. I mean, they may have used the information. They may already have been working on things and you just validated something and they never referred to your information. So it's very difficult to prove. I would say that, the arc of justice bends towards goodness over time, but it takes a long time. You probably should focus on the things you can control, and it depends on how you were damaged. If you're really damaged and you can prove that, maybe there's a case there, but the chances are that you're better off just focusing on your business and learning your lesson on sharing information.
Yeah, so I just learning. I just pay by myself to learn this kind
I'm
of
happy.
case.
I can talk to you after this. I
Okay,
just want to make
okay,
sure that
okay.
if there's any other question or otherwise I'll close it. Yes, sir.
It's Mark.
Hi, Mark.
Thanks a lot for the talk.
Thank you.
In mobile game industry, the life cycle of the game is rather short. A lot of them, die down after 6 to 18 months. How do you convince the potential acquirer that you can replicate the success in the past, even your current title might start to lose steam?
Well, I think that's hard, right? There's a reason why Blizzard is so valuable, right? It's rare to be able to consistently come up with hits again and again and again. Even if you have a good team, because we're in a hit-driven business, you can't just have a great game at the right time. You also kind of need lightning to strike. And so it is a hard argument to make. They have to believe in your team. But I don't think that in most cases it's going to affect the valuation. The valuation is really going to depend on how much money you've made, how much money you're going to make over the next 3 to 5 years based on your current run rate. And then there'll be a certain amount that they believe in your future plan. And that future plan is going to be subject to an earnout. You're going to have to prove it by actually doing it. And then if you do it, and you agree to the right metrics, then you get paid. Does that make sense? Right.
Thank you.
Sir.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for the amazing presentation. I have 2 questions. Question number 1, how can I get this presentation? Because I loved it. Question number 2 is,
Thanks.
Does this also apply to investments, not just acquisitions? Because I see in so many different industries that people will give you money and a very high valuation even if you don't have any revenues, even if you are bleeding money for the past 3 years.
Yeah.
But when it comes to gaming, everyone is asking about money, and then they do multiplies.
Well, so when it comes to an acquisition, it's almost always about EBITDA and earnings, unless you have a specific technology, like you're a middleware provider or your solution provider, and whoever is buying you needs that solution or sees how that solution at scale is worth a lot of money. Then you don't need earnings, and I have to go soon, so I'm going to go. But in terms of investments, those are more prospective. Investors generally, depending on the stage that you're seeking investment, are looking at your future potential, and they're making a bet, and it's high risk. That's why they're getting equity, right? But when they're buying the whole company, buyers are going to want to justify it based on what you are making or the value of the technology that you have, right, in the game space and in every other space. The last thing I will mention, I didn't mention in this speech, there was some talk about 51%, 49 structure. Do you know what I think the price of 51% is? I think the price of 51% of your company is the same price as 100% of your company, because 51% is operational control of your company, and so why sell that away cheap? So that's what I would say. It'd be like, well, the price is $100 million for 100% of my stock or 51% of my stock. Up to you. Okay, great. We're at time. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.